Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Event Modeling and Event Sourcing Podcast with your hosts, Martin and Adam.
Hello.
Hello, Martin. Good to see you again.
Yes, good to see you.
Yeah, it's been an exciting week. We've both been busy. A lot of interesting topics to discuss again
Yeah.
today. So let's get started. We're trying to get this in under an hour every time. We sometimes fail, but let's see if we can cover the topics today. So the first announcements. Martin, did you want to give the dates of the next
Yeah.
workshop? So we finally got nailed down some dates
Yeah.
for the workshops, and I think we can do both Europe and North America in a time slot that works for both. So we're going to give that a go.
Yeah. We will try. So
Yes.
we found dates for our beginner and advanced workshop, and the first one is not too far away. It will be February 20th. So in about 4 weeks. So this will be the beginner workshop. Again, doing 4 hours like last time, and this time I promise it will be a beginner workshop. Hopefully, last time was also scheduled to be beginner, and it was quite advanced. I think this
Well,
time we'll,
people
we'll
didn't have a choice. The advanced people still wanted to
yeah.
attend,
The,
so
the,
now
the
they have a
advanced
choice.
people they creeped in somehow. I don't know how that happened, but this time it's really scheduled to be a beginner workshop. So I think we will start really very low level, and you will learn about the concepts behind it. Very much looking forward to it. And the second one, advanced, will be what did we say? March 13th. So about 2 weeks later then.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time for those, and because it's 4 p.m. Central Europe time, I
Yeah.
think that translates to 8 a.m. or something like that for us here in on the West Coast, which makes it 11 a.m. on the East Coast of North America. So I think we can get a people that are interested can definitely be awake during those hours and those time zones. So
Could work.
it should help us get through both. But we're also, again, like we said a few weeks ago, there may be an opportunity to have other times. So we'll see. And then we have, I think you made a post on LinkedIn about the potential dates for the other conferences. We have one in Munich coming up that we're just nailing down the space for,
Yeah.
um, and uh, and once that's done, they'll be announced, and you can attend in person and have a really good time meeting with people face to face. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to that too.
I'm so looking forward to that, really.
Yeah,
So the plan is to have it in Munich. Maybe it will be June. We are not yet sure,
yeah,
but I'm so looking forward to
yeah.
meet
Well,
a lot of people.
I had a really good time in the Berlin one that Alexander helped put together last year. So that was the first official event modeling conference, which
Yeah.
was really amazing and a really good time. So I'm really looking forward to this one. So yeah, let's see how that goes, and let's get started now
Yeah.
with our
Let's go.
topics. And when we started talking just before hitting the record button here, you said something that I didn't expect most people to say. I would expect myself to say, because it's kind of controversial, is that I really don't see code reviews as that important in some cases, which is very sacrilegious in a lot of circles because you have pull requests that all go through this gatekeeping process of having a code review. Oh, don't let bad code in; it'll spoil your code base and your project will fail. Right? So what
Yeah.
made you change your opinion slightly, if not fundamentally, on code reviews?
Oh, so if you asked me the same question 10 years ago, the answer would have been extremely different. So it really boils down. I think it really boils down to having these very small functional blocks in your application. We call them slices, and they are more or less isolated. So even if bad code creeps into the system, the effects of it are limited to one slice at most. So there is not much that can go wrong if you have a clearly structured code base with very limited boundaries. So there's very limited potential to break something really bad. Not so
Don't
much
they?
if you have a big code base where everything is connected. That's a whole different story.
Yeah, the amount of coupling. Because if I think you gave an example of changing one DTO for that's used all around, and
Yeah.
you don't have the slice architecture.
Yeah,
right?
I mean the topic came up in one of the discords. I don't remember which one, and it was about code reuse. Should we reuse code across slices? And the example I gave is I don't want to change working code if something changes in the system. I like to call this the done is done principle. So when code is done, the only reason I want to touch it is if the requirements change for exactly this piece of code or for this slice. But
Yeah,
if you have reuse across these slices, say you have an address DTO that is reused across slices because it's a simple DTO, why should you copy it? But suddenly there is a new requirement that forces you to add a new field to this address DTO. Say let's add a company name, for example. And suddenly you need to change all these slices that work perfectly well, and you need to make adjustments and you need to test them just because you add one field for one slice. And the other slices are not really concerned about companies, but you still need to adjust them. And this, I think, is a big, big problem in the typical code base I see.
yeah. I think there's some lessons we can learn from other industries. I mean, if you think about oil tankers or submarines, if there's a breach in the hull, they usually have compartments, right? So if you have an
Yeah,
oil spill, it'll be just from one compartment.
yeah,
And if the tanker gets hit by a rock or an iceberg or something, then you don't lose everything and the ship doesn't sink all at once because
yeah.
they have these compartments, right? And
Same principle.
yeah, and I think also if you go take your car and imagine if you had to change your alternator in your car and then all of a sudden you had to get new windshield wipers. That doesn't make sense. Right?
Right. It doesn't make sense. Right.
so, so, but I mean, how can you make an analogy in this? It says, well, let's say in the gear structure around the alternator, we're going to use new types of washers or I don't know, not bolts and whatever. But because these bolts are so good and so nice, we're just going to change them on the windshield wipers and the doors and everything else so that we
Yeah,
have the same bolts. As a car owner, you go, I don't care.
yeah, exactly.
The door's not broken. It doesn't need this fancy new bolt. And the
Yeah,
windshield wipers are still working. They don't
yeah,
want this fancy new bolt. So, no, please don't charge me for all these extra fancy bolts just because they're better. I just
yeah,
want my car to be drivable because I need it. But in software,
exactly.
we have this idea that we can somehow, you know, proliferate this better code. So it's two subjects that are related here. It's reusability, and like you said, done is done. I like that. I see done is
Yeah,
done more as in, when someone can be finished with a piece of work. There's another saying here that we have: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's the argument against some of the refactoring questions that people have sometimes, is that, how far do we go out to improve the code
yeah,
because we see something that's not optimal. And it also comes from another topic that's found in software quite often, is the no broken windows policy. And the
yeah,
idea is that you have, if a neighborhood, you see one house that's vacant and some vandals throw a rock through the window and there's one broken window in one of the houses. If you don't fix that, it'll be part of the character of the neighborhood. And so
yeah,
the next house that someone throws a rock through a window, there's another house with a broken window. Now you have two. Now the whole neighborhood kind of looks, nah. So what's the big deal with having a third broken window in another house?
yeah.
Not much. So you can see
So,
that there's these good intentions that we have that try to make people care about the code. But I think where we're at now in terms of our journey through this industry is that it's not the details of the code; it's really the integrity of the solution, that it continues to do that. And we have another example here in Vancouver where we have the seaplanes, the otters, they're called, which are like Cessna planes but with floating things, so you can land on the water
yeah,
because we're surrounded by water here. So if you go to Vancouver Island, actually, the team and I went over to Vancouver Island 2-3 weeks ago at the beginning of the year on the water planes. It's kind of
Nice.
fun. We try to do that once a year just for fun. They have some good sales because the weather's not that great and tourism is down, so you can go for pretty cheap across probably the equivalent of €100. You can be uh, two-way trip between Vancouver and Victoria, which is quite neat.
Nice. Nice.
Um,
That's good.
but uh, but they have the same thing. So a lot of these planes are really really old, but they work really really well. And they're not manufacturing new ones, but they're manufacturing parts and exchanging the old ones. So the maintenance cycle on these planes is extremely old, which is pretty neat
Yeah.
that they have these planes running for decades in salt water, right?
Yeah.
So think about that.
Cool.
And so it's the same principle there. When you think about maintaining a large legacy code base, this principle can really save you when you start to think about, not that the code is ugly, but you start to listen to, where the coupling is and where you can make these seams. And sometimes it seems impossible that you can't do this, but I think with event modeling, you can identify, it simplifies that process because I think the traditional methods and working effectively with legacy code has a code focus. And with event modeling, we have a state focus. So
Yeah.
we want to kind of ignore the how and look at these things as the components. We're replacing an alternator. We're not taking the alternator apart to fix it. Just saying, just change it, right? So I think that's about all I have to say on the subject, I think. What do
Yeah.
you
I
think?
mean, I really, I always tell it could happen that you implement a slice and you will never ever change it again because it just runs for years maybe. And this
Yeah,
is,
that's certainly our findings over 10 years is that
yeah,
there's code that just works and it continues to do so.
yeah,
What also helps, obviously, is that there's this functional paradigm that you don't really need functional languages to do it. I mean, it really helps if you want to do some functional languages. It's perfect for you. You'd be very happy because the thought process is very similar to, immutable data and all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
So you'd be right at
absolutely.
home. But yeah, we certainly have code bases that are still running for many many years from the very beginning that we started, and they don't change. They simply don't.
Yeah,
We have maybe some of the stacks have obviously security updates because of security things, but those don't change the state transitions of the code that you wrote to implement some of the stuff behind me. If you're watching on the video
yeah,
version of this, that those things stay the same unless,
yeah,
like you said, the requirements change. And then it's really not about changing that slice. It's really about replacing that slice with another one. Maybe you have some
yeah,
clues from the old one that you can borrow the code as a jump start to get going again, and eliminate 80% of what it would take to start from the beginning because you have some things you can use. But I always go in with the assumption that I potentially will just rewrite the whole thing with no information from the old way as
yeah.
and then if there's some bonuses there where I can copy some concepts, sure, that's good.
Yeah, the mind. I do the same. The mindset is basically always considering a slice as immutable. So it's immutable. You can copy from the old one, but if you change something, it's typically a new slice. And this really helps approach it the right way.
So my question to you is now, if the mentality out there is we have open source projects, we have private projects that are using what started in the open source world, especially with the adoption of Git and GitHub, with pull requests being a main component of the life cycle of implementing things. And
Yeah.
part of the pull request is the code review. So how does that change? If you were to run your own company and you have people writing slices, what would you do different?
The I still think code pull request is a valid option, but only to learn. It's a great opportunity to learn. So if someone opens a pull request, I'm more than happy to comment on it, but I will not. So if there is not a significant issue, I would see there is no reason to reject it. But I can comment. I would do it differently because of that or because of that. Consider it. If not, it's also fine because it's your slice. You implement it. If you break it, fix it. Then it's your problem. But yeah, as these slices are so small, typically there is no reason to really reject something.
Yeah,
Is that
this was
something you do similar?
Yeah, I think I got that. I think I got pushed to go further with this from someone that's no longer with us today, is Peter Hingens, who was the maintainer of ZeroMQ, or one of the maintainers anyway. ZeroMQ is a library that does pub sub type of
Yeah,
communication without middleware, and it's used in the Bitcoin protocol and a whole bunch of other places. So it's not a non-trivial project. And one of the things that he said is that there's this horrible level of gatekeeping, people being stopped from contributing to a project because of this, code review, and thou shalt not pass if your code is not this quality, and we need to
yeah.
keep things really good. Um, uh, Peter Hingens proposed a C4. I forget what it stands for now, but it's not the architecture diagram from Simon Brown. It's a C4 is Peter Hingens, unfortunately named the same thing, code of quality, code quality conduct, something or other. I think that's what it stands for. I'll have to
I
look
think
it
I
up.
read about it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Interesting.
but the idea is that you cannot reject a pull request. It was a
Yeah,
very
yeah, I agree. Nice.
controversial thing, right?
Yeah,
And he did this before having this additive only, done is done architecture within projects. So he was already thinking about just the negative aspects of having heavy gatekeeping and also subjective gatekeeping, because you might like a certain code style different than mine, so you
yeah,
might reject something, and I might accept something, or vice versa, depending on how the code is written. And so that's bad, right? So
absolutely.
depending on who's doing the code review, you might, people don't want these subjective things. We see this in society all over the place anyway, where you're at the whim of someone's judgment, and it
Yeah,
depends who you get on the other side of the service, how your experience will be, which is horrible. We want things to be deterministic and reliable, but we have these things done. So the C4 experiment was, I'm going to probably put it in the show notes, the link to it. But ZeroMQ's contributions doubled when he made that change. It was
yeah,
2,000
yeah,
contributions up to 4,000. I think it's one of the key libraries in that protocol, and continued to proliferate. And I did try to apply ZeroMQ to some pub sub. I think when I was working at a pay by phone, so I was doing a lot more with ZeroMQ in those days. And I think I even had an initial meetup on ZeroMQ in
wow.
Vancouver. So it was fun. Met a few people, but again, it was really grassroots. There's like two people in there at the very first meetup type of thing, and that's when meetups were still kind of informal, where you could just say we're going to meet at a restaurant and just
Yeah,
discuss things. And so yeah, that was interesting. But I did a
it
lot of
will be it will be interesting to know if when the contributions doubled, did the quality decrease? I don't think so. But
no, that's the thing. And so, well, the obvious question is like, well, if you allow anything to come in, how do you keep bad or inexperienced people from contributing code that obviously is going to break the solution?
yeah,
And part of the C4 protocol is to um, accept the pull request, and then as a maintainer, it's your job to fix the code to be what the intent was.
yeah,
The idea is that the bulk of the work is done by the person doing a pull request, and of course, there's the 5 to 1% of bad actors just putting in noise. It might be worse now with AI and automations, but
yeah,
back in those days, this wasn't a concern. The frivolous pull requests was the only real gatekeeping. And it really was about just reverting the last accepted pull request. If it was
yeah,
like, well, obviously the solution is breaking because of this pull request, it was not done in a good spirit. And so that's the only thing. But when you have controls on a private project, that shouldn't be an issue at all. You have people that you hired, that you trust, and
yeah,
the malicious activity is not there. So why would you introduce something that a public project didn't need to succeed?
Yeah.
So privately, there's even less of a need for these code reviews. So it's a very hot topic because this code review is revered as like one of the top practices that you need to have for solid um, projects. And our projects are the proof of the opposite, that we don't have code reviews. We don't have these coding, standard practices. And it goes back to, I think, what we mentioned last episode. At least I mentioned it, which is, your standard best practices are not a really good fit for an entirely different way of working.
Yeah.
And some of those are really hard to let go of, ideas, for good reason, because like you said, if you have a traditional project where you change one thing and you're changing about 10 different places in your workflow because of that one change, then yeah, you probably need some of the safety and gatekeeping.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so that is a best practice. But if you want to do event sourcing, you need to understand that you need to tighten other screws, not the ones you're used to, right? You have to. So, what's an example of something that would be something that you need to do a proper event source system, right? I would off the bat say, don't reuse your read models, right? Make more and more green boxes for your specific purposes.
Yeah.
So that's a practice that is not known at all in the traditional development space, but is really important in event sourcing. So
Yeah.
you can't take both sides. It doesn't work. They're at odds with one another. So your best practices have to shift.
Yeah. So best practice. So for me, for example, number one priority, no matter what I do, is always prevent coupling. Prevent coupling is number one priority. Much more important than using dry principles or code reuse or something. Coupling breaks any project if you handle it wrong. So
Yeah.
that is my number one priority, and this is the best practice. But doing it right is not all but easy
Yeah.
because you have to overcome some things you learned for decades. This is really difficult.
Yeah. We're kind of saying the same thing from a different perspective, right? By me saying make
Yeah,
more
I know.
green boxes, it's the how of what you're saying, because you're saying
Hey,
the
I know.
principle, right?
Yeah,
You're saying that the coupling must
absolutely.
be reduced.
Yeah,
But I don't want to tell a project manager or a junior developer, explain to them coupling. So I want to just show them how to hold the shovel and say,
yeah,
just make more green boxes.
yeah. Nice, nice. I like this advice.
And in essence, they kind of get that by following the motion. And later they realize, oh, okay,
Yeah,
I actually have my piece of work in an autonomous, like it's got its kind of isolated way of working where it have a very good boundary, and something that changes there is not going to affect me at all here.
yeah,
So they slowly learn that that's why you have it there. But I think this is a very difficult task given how people with the best intentions really pull in these best practices in the old way of working, and they have this real close tie to these things. I think that bond is takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of reasoning. And so, like we said, these announced workshops and things like that, and participating in the community and talking with others that have done it is really important when you're doing a new way of handling a whole information system with event sourcing. You need to be connected to people that put you in the right frame of mind. Forget about how do you do pub sub properly, or like which event store should you use. That's details.
yeah.
It's, I think, these
Doesn't matter.
critical sort of ways of thinking that will make you want to make a new green box instead of trying to reuse it in different screens.
Yeah,
Those are they're quite you'll find how deeply ingrained they are. And even some of our previous topics, there's things that we ourselves brought in thinking they're a new way of representing new best practices. I can think of doing the versioning, upcasting of events. Took a very long time for us to realize that that's a form of dry that we brought
really,
in thinking we
really.
went deep enough. And this is seasoned practitioners across this entire event sourced industry. They still think that that's okay to do. Um,
Yeah,
it's not as bad because you still have the different green boxes, etc. But there is a reuse of code across how different versions, will be used, how a different version of the same event will be used across different green boxes. So
Yeah.
we're not immune from this. You just got to take
No.
a little bit of humble pie here and say that we think we did it all the way to the responsible level, but we're still also as a community improving on how to do this properly. And even after 10 years, you get new insights as
Yeah.
to some of these mechanisms and measurements come out years later, where you can empirically see, okay, well that didn't feel right, and I could have done it this way, but I only now, after so many years, have enough data points to say this. So
Yeah.
we're all learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think it's important not to preach this to people, because it requires a certain amount of experience, and you need to really see it live. What are the benefits? If somebody just preaches to you, don't do coupling, build slices, it will not resonate. I'm the best
Yeah,
example. It took ages for me to get this right. It took ages, really. I didn't understand this for years. Now I
yeah.
understand it, but only because I've seen what is possible if you prevent coupling in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, all of these things for me as well. I mean, I was a very adamant proponent of agile, of extreme programming, of test-driven development,
Yeah, me
of
too.
behavior-driven development. All of those things were very important, and I used to go to every single meetup, help organize the agile conferences, speak about it, help people through workshops to learn TDD. And I've had to do a 180-degree turn on a lot of that. And
Yeah,
so it took a lot for me to change. And so I have a bit of patience with people that are,
absolutely.
some people ask me, why do you bother arguing with them? Well, because I was on the other side at one point. I
Yeah,
was on the other side of the table, and and I'm thankful that the people that were explaining things to me
yeah,
uh, took the time to spend with me to say, this is why, and here's examples, and here's this, and
yeah,
yeah, it was months of stuff, but so these, involving yourself in the community, doing the workshops, spending time with others that have done this is quite important. And then, of course, your company, and then we have Jake starting his own soon. I don't know if people know yet, but there's a lot of people that are basically stepping. They just don't want to play the old game anymore, and they're stepping into this new world of responsible information system design and implementation by not losing information, having this ledger, and treating information like accountants treat money. So it's good. I'm happy to help them at any point, and as are you. All right.
absolutely.
That was a good topic. Code reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah. Think
And
about how much.
maybe one thing I would like to add, because I've seen really horrible things uh, being done with pull requests. I remember one story where there was a pull request of a junior developer, and the senior developer gave him, I think it was 70 comments or something on this pull request. And this is really, really horrible. So this is really, you can use pull requests as a weapon. It can be a sort of mobbing.
Weaponized.
And whenever I
Absolutely.
see this, I need to step in, because I cannot accept this. This is really not okay. So please, if you listen to this, don't do this. It really hurts. It really
Yeah.
hurts. Don't do this.
I think there's some old school way of managing projects that leaks in, where you're trusting someone in a senior position or a management position to manually using their experience and their intuition to wield control over one. And I think that's what you touched on here.
Yeah,
I'm very much
exactly.
against it too, because it's subjective.
Yeah,
You need to have the system protect you. You need your smart people to not control the juniors. You need your smart people to develop a system and environment for junior people to be effective.
yeah,
And I think
correct.
I said this on LinkedIn as well earlier, where it's actually not hard to find good developers. What's hard is finding a company that has a system where regular developers are effective
Yeah,
and things aren't going to crumble. I think that's what's hard for people to accept. They can't accept that they have a company or organization that has flaws. So
Yeah.
they'll blame and say, well, we have the best practices, so we need the best people. It's like, no, 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 no. If you have a good system, you should be able to use the most junior people to be effective.
Yeah.
That's the sign of a good system.
Yeah.
It's not brittle. It's not going to fall apart like a house of cards. So stop making subjective decisions, or stop putting subjectivity as a cornerstone of how things are going to run. Yes, you need leadership. Yes, you need strong opinions, but those should be focused on making your organization resilient, not to empower the actual roles where the subjectivity is, because you'll replace that manager with some idiot, and they're going to use that power to in an entirely different direction,
Yeah.
and you're going to lose your best people. I've hired people that were junior. I had to fight tooth and nail to convince my managers to hire people because someone didn't have a degree, or they didn't have this or that, and they didn't have enough experience. Those people are now the cornerstone of that company.
Yeah.
And I had to like drag people kicking and screaming that this person doesn't yet have that, but their system of thinking, the way their work ethic, how dedicated they are. I don't care how high of a degree someone else has. I can see that they're a prima donna and they're just gonna armchair architect stuff. I don't want them. I want the hardworking person that will be
Yeah.
effective in a better system. They are your canary in a coal mine. They're your indicator. If you have that person effective, they're junior, but they're dedicated, they have the work ethic, then you'll have a better system, right? And these slices that we're talking about is exactly that. This is controlled little explosions. If
Yeah.
some person that doesn't have an experience by accident in their journey makes a mistake, do they lose their job, or do they use this as a learning opportunity to make the rest of their work that much better, and get those things done that much faster? You can make it be a bad thing or a very good thing, and it's really is about how you create the environment around you and the system around you, really. And it's nothing to do with how nice you are, if you have a pool table, if you have you're inclusive and all that. You can say you're inclusive, but to be inclusive you have to remove subjectivity. I can have all the equal opportunity stuff in my company, but that's nothing if I don't have a system that removes the subjectivity. Because I might be nice and fair, but the next person that gets hired in my position might abuse it. And there goes your inclusivity. The system must be inclusive, right? And these slices and fixed costs, things that we talked about, are kind of the way to allow the system to be resilient to that. So I don't care.
Yeah.
You're junior, intermediate, whatever. I know that a junior, the slice will take a couple of weeks. Intermediate, it'll be 2 to 3 days. A very senior person can do it in 2 to 3 hours
Yeah.
because they
And
have
it
a
doesn't
whole
matter,
bunch
right?
of code. It doesn't matter because they get
It
paid
doesn't
the
matter.
same.
Yeah.
You get paid the same. Like I said, I've paid anywhere from $3,000 to $70,000 a month for a person's work. That's the range for something that works, right? And they all have to fix things for free. So that's the good carrots and sticks. But there's an example of a system that's not subjective. I don't care what I think of them. I don't care if they're black or white or purple or whatever, if they're male, female, it doesn't really matter. It's like, is the work done? Great. Here's your money.
Nice.
I want it to be, it sounds cold and like, oh, whatever, but it's actually the opposite. It's directly, you know, rewarding people for their effort, and that is the best way to get rid of this other stuff that we have problems with in society, of accepting and rejecting people based on you know someone's feelings and who you hired. So
Yeah.
it also
I
goes,
also
yeah,
I
there's
also
lots
talked
of
with,
topics to talk about in this,
yeah.
but yeah.
I also talked with someone just recently about this exact topic, and I mentioned this is also a perfect opportunity for people who just want to get into IT, into software development. If
Yeah.
you now if you are 40 years old, you've no chance to get into IT right now if you don't have a history in it. But using this approach, you can
Hmm.
start right away. It might take you long, and you might not make a fortune in the first 1 or 2 years, but this is a chance. You can get started right now.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
take one class, implement it.
we had that example at our company where we had someone have to, I use this story all the time because we had someone that had to switch work because of a worksite accident. They were in construction and then they had a serious accident where they cannot do that job anymore. And so we were able to accept them as a startup, as a very small company. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of projects, and this was, maybe 2 years into our company, and we were able to take them on, and they're thriving in the industry because of this
Nice. Yeah.
actual perspective of how to do it, and to there was no issues. There was no issues.
Yeah.
So it's if you want to have a good environment, you need to have this modularity. It's not just a technical argument. It does
No.
affect people, right? People don't. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, why do you care that we do it this way? Well, listen to what we just talked about. That's why we care.
You can do a lot of good things with
Yeah.
this, not just in technology.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You
Yeah.
can make a difference in a lot of people's lives. So especially when you look at public service organizations like the government and where your taxes get spent, you start to make some of these healthy decisions and how systems are run. It'll continue to precipitate good things with funds being allocated properly to social programs instead of lining the pockets of large companies that are taking tax money very easily, right? So
Yeah.
that's another good thing. But that's an entire podcast in itself.
Absolutely.
So what's the next thing here we have? I'll let you lead this one. I get too
What was the
excited and
next
I
one?
talk too much. That one.
Was the next one aggregates that we wanted to
Yeah,
discuss?
that always comes up. So what did people talk about?
Yeah, aggregates came up this week quite a lot. I think it was on LinkedIn. There was one example, and also in the chat there were a few examples. So the question comes up all the time: how do you design effective aggregates? How do you find the boundaries? How big should they be? How small should they be? The answer to that question seems quite difficult. It seems. What's your take on it?
Well,
How did?
if it keeps coming up, obviously there is guidance needed. So,
Yeah,
well, I have my take on it is that we aggregates and aggregate roots came from domain driven design
it's the blue book. Yeah,
and the blue book, and there, it gets criticized from different angles. Even Eric Evans himself says that he'd probably put the chapters in a different order or something like this. But it's one of those implementation parts of the book. And I think if you go back 20 years plus when the book was originally written, and it was originally a paper and then a set of two papers and then a book, as people liked what Eric was talking about and his approach. During that time, object-oriented programming reigned supreme, and you had graphs of objects related to one another, and we use that standard explanation of an order object. You order something online, and then maybe you have a few things. So there's order
yeah,
lines, and then you have an address object, and you can see how these are related. And so the idea of this aggregate is to group them together so that you have a transactional boundary, but you also have some sort of gatekeeping in a new sense of the word, of at least one point at which where you can audit the information coming in or out of this whole group of objects. So
yeah,
you have this tell don't ask principle. So you don't manipulate the items or the address directly, but
yeah,
you always use that aggregate root object, the order, to manipulate anything about this whole set of objects together. And
yeah,
that was really good because this aggregate boundary simplified things. What was the problem with addressing an order line item directly? Well, you might not know that someone did that, right? So you had this coordination of effort that was a problem in this. Is that okay? I've worked on these objects, and I know that I can, cancel an order, or finalize an order, or ship an order. But then there's some developers that will go to order dot items index one, and I'm going to change something on this line,
yeah,
and I don't know that they did that because I've been working at this order object. So the idea of an aggregate by this design principle that it says is that I only have one little access point here. So if someone is going to change an item in this order, they're going to have to add something to this common interface, the aggregate root, so that everyone notices that something's happened here,
Yeah.
if it's going to have some adverse effects, or I need to change my work to make sure that what they change doesn't get missed by my totals calculation or something like this, then that would be good if it was one thing. So that's kind of like the aggregate idea. Um, the problem is that, notice what it's trying to solve. It's trying to solve the coordination of effort, and so that you don't have things kind of coming in through the back door where you don't know that something got changed on you.
Yeah.
Also, it means this transactional boundary that, okay, if we have many line items getting changed at the same time, we might run out of inventory because we don't know how we adjusted some of these things, especially in something that you can only, maybe something you can change a color to and things get painted before they get shipped. Well, the inventory items have to have some sort of a collection of total inventory before they're painted. But on the line items, they might have appear as individual things with different colors for each. So there's this. That's the need for the transactional boundary. That now you need to kind of know on the whole, what does this changing of one item mean? Or is it related to any other items in that list?
Yeah.
So there's all these concepts that it helps. So why is this not so important when you're doing event sourcing? Well, we have an audit trail with event sourcing. So event sourcing kind of grew up, at least a lot of it grew up in the same community as domain driven design. And this is where you have some of these questions come up, where some of, like we said, best practices for traditional object oriented programming. Definitely, domain driven design helps that, especially even like the tactical, coding patterns like aggregates. They definitely help. But as you move to something that has an audit trail, that we have the slice approach, that we can look at a workflow as something to organize with, not just objects and their current state. You start to have some different things. So that's kind of my take on aggregates and why they're there, and like how you decide on a boundary. It's things that's supposed to change together, keep
Yeah.
them together. So that's how I design it. And event modeling allows a place for that. If you are doing domain driven design and you are using aggregates in your swim lanes, you can have a sub swim lane that says, okay, here's all the events to do with order, order address provided, item added to order. You have all of that sitting in one row across your event models. It's visually very easy to see an aggregate, um, and and all of the information that that encapsulates, so that all these things change together. You can have an idea of a state of the aggregate just by looking what happened in that row.
Yeah.
That's how I
Yeah.
see it.
So yeah, I also have the events of one aggregate is typically one swim lane, so you really see it. But what I see as a problem with aggregates is I see it all the time that people try to build a model using aggregates. They try to find the perfect aggregate and try to find the perfect abstraction for the model. And for me, this is not absolutely not what an aggregate is about. The aggregate is just a validation. Let's call it a validation model. It's only there to validate, to ensure the system stays in a consistent
Yeah,
state
that
all the time.
gatekeeping thing, right?
It's
That
a gatekeeper.
gateway. Yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah,
gatekeeper. And that's also an effective strategy to find the aggregate. So what I do to find the aggregates is I just look, where are the constraints? Where are the invariants? Where are the rules that need to change together? Where are these things that need to happen together? This is where you look for your aggregates. Don't look for the perfect model. So what you do, what people always do in the first sessions, they choose the nouns. They look for
yeah.
the nouns. They have a card, they have an order, they have a customer, but these are typically not your aggregates, because they are not. This is not where the constraints are. The constraints are somewhere else. But if you really look, where are these rules? Where are the invariants? This is where you find your aggregates, and they are typically not named after your first nouns. Typically, it's something different.
Yeah, and I also have had a very different approach to design, including aggregate design, if you want to call it that. Is that, and part of the reason that event modeling came about is that you want the information flow to do the design for you. You want to focus on, what your user goals are and follow the information as it goes through the system, and see the patterns it tells you about, and notice that I need to have this for my customer at this point. They need to see this invoice. They need to do this. You kind of see how everything's related on a timeline, and what comes in and out of the system to provide that, and letting that information flow be the guide for any abstractions that you have. And of
Yeah.
course, the problem here is also that you're talking about, designing an aggregate. And like you said, exactly, it's really about the influx, all the blue boxes on an event model. That's like where it's helpful. But then you
Yeah.
also, and so it has to project its own state. And we talked about this many times on the meetup from years ago during COVID as well, especially, is that you don't, even in event sourcing, you don't need all of the events for every single command. If I want to cancel an order, do I need to look at every single event about adding products or not? My business rule may be just like, you don't need to do any gatekeeping. A cancel order, even if it's been canceled before, that's fine. You can cancel a canceled order. It's going to mean nothing. But any order
Yeah.
can be canceled at any time. That's your business rule. It's still affecting the swim lane or aggregate of all of the things to do with this order. But do I need to project the state from all of them? Not at all. I can ignore it completely. Whereas something else, such as adding another item, I might have a business rule that says I can't have more than $1,000 on these outstanding, on any particular order. So of course I'm going to have to look at the previous events that happened for that aggregate and add up whatever's there and make sure that I'm not over that total. If I'm over that total, then I'm going to reject it. If
Yeah.
if I'm fine, I'm going to add another event. And that, in that particular case, that blue box requires looking at that. So you can start to see where you still have that transactional boundary, but now you have, well, in my implementation, I don't have to look at everything, right? So it's kind of what we used to do in code is now elevated up into the business, being able to see what things relate to what I want to accomplish, like canceling an order or
Yeah.
adding another line item. So I think it's, that's why I don't want to use the term aggregate at all anymore, because it has some of these previous definitions, especially the non-event source definitions, um, which lumps in the reading side, the green boxes, into what the
Yeah.
aggregate does, which is not good, because you can, in a traditional way, you can still say that, okay, well, what is your order total? I can read that by looking at the object that I have,
Yeah.
and there's a property that says, well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I want to have that projection also be influenced by maybe other events, such as exchange rates or something else, that may totally be outside of the scope of the aggregate. But this is the idea of
Absolutely.
event sourcing: is that you're pulling in information from where it actually is. I don't have to make another abstraction for like a order that has, adjusted for exchange rates or something like that. I don't need to make this, I don't need to make my order more complex. I don't need to make another order. I can just say, here's pricing based on exchange rates, and I can have a green box that may or may not use some of these things, and that's fine.
Yeah.
So I've dropped a lot of the aggregate stuff. I mean, in our work, because people are still expecting a lot of domain driven design stuff, we have plenty of aggregate implementations because that's what our clients are comfortable with, and it's fine. It's good. We have no problem with doing that. But if we're to do things ourselves, we go faster by not bothering with that. And so a lot of times we'll have a single swim lane for a lot of things that might be multiple aggregates in other ways. And so we've turned to a very functional point of view. Again, the domain driven design, tactical aspects of the practice with aggregates are based on things that were written around the time of the Blue Book,
Yeah.
where the functional languages and paradigms were not, in the enterprise out there. Had a lot of OO type stuff, noun verb implementations, and so and I guess I'm guessing that's why people are trying to focus on the other side of DD, the strategic, instead, and they're saying that, you shouldn't even look at the tactical. Tactical is good if you're doing something specific, but
Yeah,
I can see like why people are kind of pushing back on that as the industry matures. And of course, we have AI now, and we have data even cheaper to be stored. So, well, event sourcing is permeating more and more, and so some of these things that were more easily adopted, um, in 20 years ago,
yeah, it
are no
seems.
longer an issue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, there's simply a lot of confusion around this whole concept because there are so many articles on the internet that simply claim wrong things. Questions like, should I reuse the aggregate to display information? I mean, it's exactly what you just said. No, no. For me, the aggregate lives entirely on the right side of the system. It just ensures you can execute this command or you can't execute this command. If
yeah.
you
I
want to
think that's a
display
good
information,
focus because
yeah,
a lot of people get confused about, like, especially if they read just the blue book. So kind of tapering it down to say this is where you make your state change decisions, and that's it. I think that helps a lot of people. It's a really good
yeah,
good step to have.
yeah. It's the aggregate is not your domain model, not at all. It's just I typically I don't use the term aggregate. I always use consistency boundary. Then people immediately understand. Okay, that's the only thing it cares about.
Yeah,
Keeping the system
exactly.
consistent. If you want to display information, you don't load an aggregate to display the price in the UI. No,
Yeah,
you project the information into a read model, and then you do whatever you want with it, or in several read
exactly.
models.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's
but
a
we still have a lot to do here.
Yeah,
So
a
there's a
lot,
lot of
lot of.
confusion.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of edits to the chapters on this in your book and the next versions. I'm sure as you get different perspectives from people, there'll be better ways to explain these topics or additional ways to explain
Yeah,
these topics too. So yeah, I look forward to that. All right, and so that actually dovetails into the last topic that we have is the code reuse.
I mean, I think we already discussed this. This was
Sort of, yeah. I mean, from the perspective of the aggregate we have, but there's many worse code reuses, I think, that I see.
yeah,
How
but I
about
think
you?
this basically this is the same. This always comes back to the slice approach. Do you want to reuse code across slices? I don't think so. So I typically I don't use code. I don't do code reuse if I don't have to. I try to keep everything isolated, and stuff that I'm really allergic nowadays is something like abstract base classes. So I really hate
Yeah,
abstract base classes with a passion because they create the worst kind of coupling you can get.
yeah.
So I used
But it looks
I
so
like them a
good,
lot.
and this is a
Yeah, it
problem
looks
with
amazing.
this is a problem because this is what you learn in school. If you take a computer science degree, guess what you're teaching people? That is your default
Yeah, I
approach
know.
to learn about
I know.
inheritance and to learn about abstract base
Horrible.
class and concrete
Horrible.
base class and all of these things that are just inviting you to be happy about an excessive level of coupling that will destroy you in real world projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So I cannot remember when I used an abstract base class the last time in a real project. They simply I don't use them. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I think the only place I've seen them is for events where I have a base class event because I know I'm going to have a timestamp in every event. And
Yeah,
I've seen that in some
not
implementations.
even
But
that.
as long as it's not something that I have to change as I add features, then it's fine. And it usually ends up something that's more infrastructure rather than business logic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For example, you could say something like the metadata you use on the events. You could put the
Yeah,
metadata.
exactly.
It's a map on an abstract base class. I could see that. Okay,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
as soon
There's
as
there's a
it's
few places, but
yeah,
they're certainly not living in what the business is telling me the system needs to do.
no, something like you have
Yeah,
an abstract order, and then some classes derived from that. No, that's not going to happen in my project. This
yeah.
makes no
No,
sense.
no, that's exactly right. Well, I think we covered everything. This
Yeah,
is
I think
we're
so.
in under an hour, so okay,
Really,
good.
are we? Nice.
I was
I mean,
hoping it'd be
the original
faster.
goal was to keep it at around 30 minutes. We worked on it.
Yeah, might have been a little bit ambitious, but I don't mind. I mean, I love talking about this and to talk about the things I love with you that shares the same passion is it just feels good. So I don't mind. I know it's later
Yeah, actually,
in your
actually,
weekend,
I find
so
this. I think this was one of our best episodes today. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed the
I enjoyed it
the
too.
discussion today.
Yeah, and so I'm glad that the community was bringing up good, concrete topics, juicy topics to talk about that are, sometimes we get into the weeds a little bit on, which is important too. But I think we got into some fundamental stuff here, and
Yeah.
I think with the workshops and all that, people will be able to um, use the examples, their hands-on stuff, to really experience what we're talking about here. So
I
again,
mean,
that's kind of our announcements here. So yeah.
people need to be careful what they discuss in the discourse because I'm listening carefully and I'm writing down every topic. Might come up in the next podcast episode.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's good. I like it. So, again, thank you so much, Martin. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure
thank
as
you.
always, and I'm
Yep.
really looking forward to the workshops. I got to get on to updating the websites on the dates and start to open up the registrations. So, really looking forward to it. And as always, see you next week.
See you
Looking
next
forward to
week.
another exciting chat.
Exactly.
Thanks,
Looking
everyone.
forward to it. Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.